Word problems, day two. So these are perimeter problems, and they remember they get kind of tricky. These are systems. So we are looking for two equations, two linear equations. So the first I see is kind of this first sentence that talks about the length of a rectangle is 4 times more than the width. And remember, these are the tricky ones. They don't follow we have to follow what the words mean, not necessarily where the 4 times is close to. So how I set this up, and it really works really well again, is since the length comes first in our sentence, I'm going to put it first, give myself some space to maybe put some numbers before, some after, and same thing with the width. The width comes after because in the sentence it comes at the end. So now I'm going to kind of use my hands. So on my left hand, I'm going to kind of hold them out together because they're going to be equal. And I'm going to shake my left hand and think length. Then I'm going to shake my right hand and think width. Now we're going to match them up because remember, in our equation right now, they are equal in our equation, but they're not true with the sentence. So you're kind of holding them next to each other equal out in front of you, and then we're going to read the sentence. So remember, shake the left hand for the length. We're thinking length. So now let's read it. The length of a rectangle is 4 times the width. And don't you feel like that the length hand wants to be up higher? So raise it up higher. And now we can they're not equal anymore, so we have to make them equal. So we need to multiply the right hand, which then brings that up to that same level as the length. So now we've got our first equation, L equals 4W. And that's what that sentence means. Now, perimeter is a little tricky. So a lot of times what I do is I draw myself a little rectangle, and here's the most common mistake with the perimeter is people write L plus W equals 60. So they've got this partially right, but not quite all the way right. So now think about how you draw your rectangle. You go around the perimeter all the way around back to where you started. So that would be L plus W plus L plus W. So if we kind of think about drawing it around, that would be 2L's. And so notice how when I first wrote it, I was missing an L. So it's the 2L's and 2W's. So now I've got my two equations to solve my system. So that's my equations that I'm going to use. And I'm going to now circle this one because it's L. And then I'm going to draw my arrow like we've done before to the L because that is the L. So I'm going to substitute that in. So 2, and put a parentheses, L plus 2W equals 60. So I'm going to rewrite that equation, just leaving a space for L to put in my 4W. And now I can simplify this, and now this is not a distributive property because a distributive property would have a plus or minus in here in between the 4 and the W. It's just multiply. So we've got a multiply and a multiply between these, so I can just rearrange it and multiply 2 times 4 is 8W plus 2W equals 60. And then I can combine these. Remember, it's not subtracting 2W because then we would have to put the subtract 2W over here and on the right hand side, and that makes it messy. We want the W's together. So 8W plus 2W is 10W. Bring down my equals, bring down my 60, divide both sides by 10, and W equals 6. And remember, we have to put our label 6 centimeters. So I'll look up here and I was noticing centimeters in my sentence. So 6 centimeters is my width. To get my length, I use my equation up here. So that would be 4W. So I'll substitute the 6 in because that is the W. So my length equals 4 times 6, which is, the length is 24. And we have to remember it is centimeters. Centimeters. So we've got our length and our width, and that was, we wrote and solved a linear system. This is our linear system up here, the two equations, to find our length and our width. So both of them, and don't forget you have to have the labels. All right, number 2 is a little bit different, but similar. So this one is the width of the rectangle is 11 feet more than the length. So here's where it gets a little tricky. So first comes the width, then the length. So this is my hand kind of making them equal first. So the width comes first equals the length. And I know it's not, but this is what I'm building the equation. I'm starting with something to kind of build it out. So we've got our W on our left hand. So shake your left hand or put them out front so they're equal at the same height. So shake your W hand on the left and then read the sentence over here. The width of the rectangle is 11 feet more. So I feel like I'm going to move my width hand up higher to 11 more-ish. So I need to make it equal. So I will add 11. So now that they're equal, and I'll bring that length, the right-hand side, up. So now that they're equal, the width equals length plus 11. Now remember our perimeter again. Our perimeter is, and I don't usually draw a big rectangle, but it helps me think through. There are 2 L's and 2 W's to find the perimeter around the outside. So that would be 2 lengths plus 2 W's widths equals, and I'll look, 70 is our perimeter around. So I've got my 2 equations, linear equations, to solve my system. So I've got my W equals this, so I'll circle this. So now this group equals W. So I'm going to draw my arrow to the W in the other equation and do my substituting in there. So I'll rewrite it. 2L plus 2 be my group, which is the W, equals 70. So bring everything down from that equation, and then we're going to substitute that L plus 11 in to that W spot. That W, we're going to substitute it in there. Now this is distributive property because we have 2 times L and 2 times 11 because we've got this plus number or add or subtract in between. That makes it that distributive property. So 2L plus 2L plus 22, watch out for that 22 because a lot of people will do it to the first but then forget about that second. And then we can combine our 2 L's together on the same side to be 4 L's plus 22 equals 70. Then we'll subtract 22 from both sides. Bring down my 4L. Bring down the equals. I'll regroup to do the calculation correctly. So 8 and then 6 minus 2 is 48. Then to get L by itself, we'll undo multiplication with dividing by 4 on both sides. So L equals 10 and 2. So the length is 12, and I'll write in my label, feet. That's one of the dimensions. So the second dimension is the width. So I'll do that over here where I have some space. That would be our L plus 11. So the width is 12 plus 11, which is 23. And I'll remember that label of feet. And there we have our 2 together. The length, the width. We used a system. We wrote a system and solved it to get our answers. All right, now it's your turn to try it. So pause the video now and see if you can write the two equations for the system, solve it, get your length and width, and then come back and I'll walk you through it and see if you're right or make any adjustments that you have. All right, so we start with our length here. So I'm going to start with my length equals width. Now, I moved my equals a little too close, so I always want a little space to see where I put that extra numbers around. So now I'm going to read. I'm going to put my hands out in front and read that sentence. So I'm going to shake my left hand, which is my length. The length of a rectangle is 3 times. That's a little higher, so I'm moving it up. The width, so that means I'm going to multiply the width times 3. Now, sometimes I see people put that times 3 back here because they don't leave enough space up front. So, which is mathematically correct, but what happens is when they get to the distributive property, they think this is distributive. But remember, this is multiply. I don't really like to use the x because that looks like a variable x. So that's why I think about this as putting my space in that front, multiplying it by 3. And remember, we don't have to put a multiply there because it means multiply between the 3 and the w. So by multiplying that side, I've moved my right hand up to that same level as the length side. So now the perimeter, this is the other spot where, oh, notice how I went around to make my rectangle, is I had a width and a width, a length and a length. So that helps me remember that it's 2 lengths plus 2 widths equals 72. And now, there is my system of linear equations. And that's the harder part, is to really get that. Now I'm going to draw my arrow to the L for the length, because that group is the length. So now I've got 2 L's plus 2W equals 72. And here's where, if we had put that W times 3, so this is where a lot of people think, oh, this is the distributive property, but it's not. It's really not, because that multiplication has to be an addition or subtraction. So that's why I like that 3W there. The 3 in front of the W is, now I can see, oh, it's just 2 times 3 times W, so it's just 2 times 3 is 6W plus 2W, and bring everything else down. I can combine these two. Remember, we combine them. We don't subtract 2W from both of these. You just combine them because they're on the same side of the equal sign. So 8W equals, bring down that 72, divide both sides by 8. So W equals 9. And remember, we have to do our label, and I only see one label in this whole sentence, so we have to really look for it. Millimeters. Ooh, that's a really small width. So that's the width. Now we need the length. So I'm going to, length is 3 times that 9, that width. So that would be, the length is 27. And it's in millimeters. So we'll label that. And we've got our length, our width with our labels. And we've got 2 equations for the solving of our word problem.